The average family eats 200 pounds of potatoes a year. Most people buy them. You can grow them in 100 square feet. The problem isn't that potatoes are hard to grow. It's that most gardeners plant them wrong, using shallow rows that waste 90% of the soil's productive potential. When the deep planting method perfected can triple or quadruple your harvest from the same footprint, potatoes don't need space, they need depth. Here's why conventional gardening fails. Gardeners treat potatoes like surface crops, when they're actually underground tubers that want to send out multiple layers at different depths. But shallow soil only allows one layer, which is why you get disappointing yields from so much space. Every inch you go deeper multiplies the harvest exponentially, because the plant can develop another complete layer of tubers at that level. This system has 7 core principles that transform a tiny plot into a potato powerhouse. Principle 1. Soil fertility. Potatoes are heavy feeders that demand extremely rich soil loaded with organic matter, which means you must manure or compost the bed heavily before planting, because no amount of technique can compensate for poor fertility. Recommended digging in as much compost or well-rotted manure as you can possibly get your hands on, to the point where the soil is almost black with organic matter, and so loose you can push your arm into it without resistance. A single plant in deep, rich soil can produce 10 to 15 pounds of potatoes, while the same variety in shallow, poor soil might only give you 2 or 3 pounds. And that difference comes entirely from soil preparation. In very soft, deeply cultivated soil, you can plant with a potato planter and leave just 12 in between seed potatoes, which means you fit far more plants into the same space while actually increasing the yield per plant because the roots aren't competing for horizontal territory. This is the core insight. Potatoes don't need space, they need depth. Every inch deeper you plant creates room for another layer of tubers to form as the plant grows. Principle 3. Compost and mulch system. This method eliminates digging entirely by laying seed potatoes directly on top of a thick layer of compost, covering them with more compost, and then piling on a deep mulch of straw, spoiled hay, or leaves. As the plants grow, you keep adding more mulch to cover the developing tubers, which means you never have to dig or earth up. And when harvest time comes, you simply pull back the mulch and pick potatoes off the surface without damaging the plant. The huge advantage? You can harvest early potatoes by gently removing some mulch, taking a few tubers, and replacing the mulch so the plant continues growing and producing more for the main crop later. All these mulch cover methods enrich the soil for other crops after the potatoes are finished, which means as you rotate your potato crop around your garden, the whole property becomes more fertile every year. Principle 4. Vertical growing in containers. For small spaces like patios or balconies where you don't have room for a traditional bed, growing potatoes in barrels, bins, or towers produces massive yields from just a few square feet. Fill the bottom of a barrel with 6 inches of soil and plant 1 or 2 seed potatoes. Then, as the plants grow and before they flower, add another layer of soil to cover the lower stems, and keep building up layers as the plants push upward, until they reach about 4 feet tall. The plant will develop tubers at every level where you added soil, which means a single barrel can produce 30 to 50 pounds of potatoes from the space of a garbage can. This is the principle in action. Potatoes don't need space, they need depth, and containers let you stack that depth vertically. Principle 5. Proper earthing up. For conventional row planting, earthing up protects developing tubers from light exposure that turns them green and poisonous with solanin. Potatoes need room underground, and they must be completely covered with soil or mulch at all times, which means you draw or throw soil up around the plants as they grow to create ridges that give tubers space to expand while keeping them in total darkness. One tip that's been shared? Potato plants stand upright at night and in early morning, but flop outward during the day, So the best time to earth up is early morning when you can work close to the stems without damaging the plants. Principle 6. Choosing the right varieties. Earlies, secondaries, and main crop potatoes have completely different growing times and storage qualities. And choosing wrong means either eating all your potatoes fresh before they can be stored, or growing storage varieties that take so long your season runs out. Earlies mature in 90 to 100 days and are perfect for eating fresh with their sweet, waxy texture, but they don't store well. While main crop varieties take 120 to 140 days, but produce larger yields and store for months in a cool, dark place for a year's supply. You want mostly main crop varieties that will keep through winter, with just a few earlies for fresh eating in summer. Principle 7. Rotation and disease prevention. Potatoes are members of the Solanaceae family, along with tomatoes, and they suffer from the same diseases, which means you must never plant potatoes in the same bed 2 years in a row, or disease organisms will build up in the soil and devastate your crop. The 4-year rotation puts potatoes in the first year after heavy manuring, followed by legumes that fix nitrogen, then brassicas that use that nitrogen, and finally, root crops. Which means, by the time potatoes return to that bed 4 years later, the soil has been completely renewed and disease organisms have died off. Blight is the biggest potato disease caused by hot, humid weather that creates perfect conditions for fungal spores. And while you can spray with Bordeaux mixture made from copper sulfate and lime, the better approach is choosing blight-resistant varieties and planting earlies that mature before blight season hits in mid to late summer. Here's what the numbers actually look like. 100 square feet planted with the deep bed method at 12-inch spacing gives you about 100 plants. And if each plant produces 10 pounds of potatoes in rich soil, you harvest 1,000 pounds, which is a year's worth for an average family, with potentially much more, depending on your soil quality and variety selection. Even if you only get 5 pounds per plant, which is conservative, that's still 500 pounds from 100 square feet, compared to conventional shallow planting that might only produce 150 to 200 pounds from the same space. The practical application starts with preparing your bed in fall or early spring by digging in massive amounts of compost or manure until the soil is black, loose, and rich. If you're using the deep bed method, double dig to 18 inches and work organic matter throughout the entire depth. Or if you're using the mulch method, lay down a thick layer of compost as your base and have plenty of straw or hay ready for mulching as the plants grow. Plant seed potatoes in early spring after the last frost, spacing them 12 inches apart in deep beds or 18 inches in conventional rows. Seed potatoes are just small potatoes or pieces of larger potatoes with at least 2 eyes. And while you can buy certified disease-free seed potatoes, you can also save your own from the previous year's crop if they're healthy and vigorous. The transformation from planting to harvest takes 3 to 4 months for earlies and 4 to 5 months for main crop varieties. During that time, your main job is keeping the developing tubers covered with soil or mulch, controlling weeds which compete aggressively in the rich soil potatoes need, and watching for blight during hot, humid weather, when you might need to spray or simply harvest early if the disease appears. Here's what this means in practice. Instead of buying $200 worth of potatoes every year and worrying about price increases or supply disruptions, you grow your entire year's supply in one small garden bed that costs maybe $20 in seed potatoes and produces food worth 10 times that amount. Instead of eating potatoes that were harvested months ago, stored in warehouses and treated with sprout inhibitors, you dig fresh potatoes that taste completely different because the sugars haven't converted to starch yet and the texture is creamy instead of mealy. And when you give them rich soil and room to expand vertically, they respond with yields that seem impossible compared to conventional shallow planting. Every inch of depth you add to your potato bed increases the potential harvest exponentially. because the plant can develop another layer of tubers at that level. So start today by choosing a 100 square foot area in your garden and beginning to build the soil with compost and manure. When you give potato plants the depth and fertility they need, they produce 10 to 15 pounds each, and 100 plants in 100 square feet equals 1,000 to 1,500 pounds of potatoes. Potatoes don't need space, they need depth, and that's the power of understanding what plants actually need and giving it to them.